nothing in life is possible if you haven't really been enjoying the love, the unconditional love of people around you. And in my case, of course, that starts, like with many, with an unconditional love of my mother. My mother always encouraged me, always supported me, always thought that was a good idea. Even if it was a stupid idea, she would still tell me it was a good idea. And that if I wanted something, I better do it. And if I wanted the money, then I better earn it. And a very important turning point in my life was that when my father left the family and left me with my mother. My brother and sister were already married. And when I ended up as a 16-year-old alone with my mother, I had the greatest opportunity ever in life to take care of Mom. And I've been able to take care of her ever since, until she passed away. But that was because my father left the family and he never took care and never looked back. And 20 years later, it took me about 20 years. 20 years later I saw my father again and I said, "You were a bastard. I mean, what you did with Mom was really totally unacceptable, but I have to thank you for having been a bastard. Because if you hadn't been so bad with Mom, I would never have had the opportunity to take care of her. And the greatest gift in life was for me to take care of Mom." And this was a shift, because it allowed me to be working and studying and to be proud of that tiny nucleus of a family where we could try to cheer up and be happy. Because I know my mom was crying every night, and I know she was unhappy every day, but she was so happy to have a son and to see that he was going to do great things in life. So to me, nothing is ever possible unless somewhere in your life, some moments, you have enjoyed that great gift of unconditional love. A second major thing that happened in my life was that I was growing up at university in the 70s. So I'm not a product of the 60s, I'm not a product of the hippies, I'm not a product of those who were against society and were going to turn their backs to society and afterwards enjoyed society thoroughly and are the most conservative ever imagined. But I came through in the 70s. And there was one book that made a great impact on me was in 1972, Limits to Growth. The book of the Club of Rome, which basically stated that, you know, if we continue the trends as they're going now, we're ending up in a disaster. And I really thought that book, with the mathematics behind it, was an amazing insight. And as a student leader, I was elected student leader in 1978 for the whole country, not just my university, but for the whole country. I thought that we are not here anymore. So that's 10 years after the '68 revolution of the students. 10 years later, I thought that it was not time to be against society. It was time to transform society. And I had this incredible belief that entrepreneurs should do that. But an entrepreneur should not be the entrepreneur who's just there for the money. An entrepreneur is the one who is keen on transforming society. And I needed help from someone. I needed a mentorship. I needed guidance. And I reached out to the man who had made this report to the Club of Rome of Limits to Growth Possible, Aurelio Peccei, and I wrote him. And amazingly, I got an answer. And even more amazing, we met. And a miracle, because we got on very well. And we met, and until he passed away, he really mentored me in the common good, in the initiative taking, in never being stopped because people say it's not possible. He mentored me in really going for what I believe, and of course as a student I had realized that if I am able as a student leader to mobilize 150 people to jointly work on all these initiatives, well, I can lead a business. I can, because what is business all about? What is innovation all about? What is entrepreneurship all about? Is having a team of highly motivated people who are ready to change the world. So the student leadership not only taught me to work with volunteers and to be positive and to put the students on the track not of protest, but put them on the track of, if you disagree, make a difference yourself. And you can't make a difference on your own unless you have a team of like-minded people. My frustration, though, was that all the students, as university students, we were convinced we would be the entrepreneurs. In the end of the 150, only one became an entrepreneur, and it was me. All the others succumbed to these incredible, interesting proposals of large corporations who were willing to offer fantastic salaries and a car for the bright and young. And I felt that was not what we had signed up for. But we took it as a reality, and I left Europe for Japan. I was invited by the Belgian government to go and work and live in Japan to learn another culture. I had traveled in Latin America, I had been in Africa, had all been through the United States, but I had never been to Asia, except a short visit in Singapore. And so the Belgian government, as one of the good students of the nation, gave me a scholarship to go and live in Japan. And there I had an incredible opportunity to meet Mr. Shoichiro Honda, the founder of Honda Corporation. I got the Honda Award for some of the articles I had written, and I had the privilege of meeting regularly with Mr. Honda. And he shaped really my thinking as the entrepreneur. I remember so well asking Mr. Honda, how could he ever have decided in 1956, the year I was born, how could he ever have decided to start building cars when the government of Japan was against and the large corporations like Toyota and Mitsubishi were against as well? And I had just finished my MBA, and so I asked him if he had perhaps undertaken a SWOT analysis, a strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And he looked at me and said, of course I didn't do it. I said, so what did you do? He said, well, first of all, if I would have made that analysis, I would have felt so frustrated because I had nothing but weaknesses and the threats were enormous. I could not ever engage in that. So what did you do? He said, well, I only made a list of the weaknesses of my competitors, and that list was so long, and I felt good. And that to me was the key. If you feel good as an entrepreneur, you know you have all odds against you, but if you focus on the weakness of your adversaries, well, you can do ippon, you can take them to the floor. And that is what we need to do. So he shaped my thinking of just doing it and not worry about your weaknesses. Just make certain that you keep a clear focus on what you believe you can do much better than what the others are not performing at all. And that became a philosophy in life. And to me, the Honda meeting and being a Honda fellow was something that not only introduced me to Japan, which is something that is of importance for the rest of my life, but it also introduced me to an entrepreneurial thinking of a different nature. I also started understanding how Mr. Honda succeeded in getting going with his motorbike business. After the Second World War in 1945, he immediately started selling motorbikes, but of course no one wanted to buy a motorbike because there was no fuel, there was no petroleum. So he started tapping the pine trees in the forests in Japan and took out the turpentine, and he sold the motorbikes with the turpentine contract. And that's how he started his business. And to me it was such a logical thing to have a natural turpentine resource to fuel your motorbikes that made him the entrepreneur of my type, systemic, community-oriented, pragmatic, use local resources. So many things that today I find in the blue economy. This new way of thinking at the economy that is not against globalization, but that is in favor of something that is much better. I find it back in those incredible entrepreneurship lessons that I got from Mr. Honda. Of course, as an entrepreneur, I started building up my own businesses, one business to the other business, and then I made a great leap forward. I built my own factory. I was 34 years old, and I owned and I had built the first ecological factory. I had learned a lot about ecology, not just from the Club of Rome. One of my companies was a publishing house, and I published all the books of Lester Brown and the World Watch Institute in Europe. I organized Lester stores around Europe, but after 4 or 5 years of listening to the dramatic news every year over and over again, I said no more bad news. For me, the shift in thinking was that I had enough of the bad news, and that it was time to decide to turn statistics around. I did not decide to have a good case study. I wanted to change the scope and the scale to the point that the negative trends that we saw everywhere could finally be turned around. And I decided it had to be through manufacturing. I had to produce. I had to make products. It was just at the same time that my first son was born and my second son was born. And so when the factory inaugurated in 1992, with CNN primetime news covering it worldwide as the ecological factory, I thought that finally I was making an impact. The world looked at me and said, "You're a guru, you're the green entrepreneur, you're the one who's taking on Procter & Gamble, you're taking on Unilever, you're taking market share from the big guys with a biodegradable product." And I was thriving on that for about 2 years, until I went to see, in end of '93, the suppliers of my raw material, palm oil. I had a red carpet treatment in Indonesia because I was the biggest buyer at the time of palm oil for detergents. I was the number one. And of course I was being thanked for the economic development that I had facilitated by bringing ecological products on the market, only to realize within hours that what I had done was destroy the rainforest of Kalimantan, Indonesia. And it was such a shock. I realized that I was not at all the guru that people thought I was. I realized that I had misguided people unintentionally. And when I came back, I was adamant that this business has to turn around. I went to talk to Greenpeace and said, why don't we consider a campaign against my own company? I will argue against my company as a transparency and an honesty and a forgiveness to be asked to everyone, because what I was proposing was not sustainability, it was only biodegradability. What a hard lesson it was to realize that I was not the guru. It was not biodegradability that would put us on the path towards sustainability. It was not an ecological factory that was making the difference if I didn't see the whole system. And that brought me to start looking for dialogues with people who could guide me. And one of the big dialoguers was Fritjof Capra. Fritjof Capra, whose books I've read, The Tao of Physics. We met, we learned to know each other. I went to Berkeley, where he was teaching, and we was living at the university, close to the university. And Fritjof and I went for our walks in the foothills of Berkeley. And walking and dialoguing, he brought me to Schumacher College to teach about my experience of how the guru who isn't the guru, how I transformed. And my transformation was then supported by another philosopher who had been the inspiration of Fritjof Capra, and his name is Arne Næss, the Norwegian philosopher who came up with the term of deep ecology. I embraced the logic of Arne. I studied his works in Norwegian, and I realized that indeed it's time not to learn about nature, it's time to learn from nature. And over the years I started framing more and more that we don't have to learn from an insect and we don't have to learn from a scallop or a tree, but we have to learn from the ecosystems. Business needs to model itself as an ecosystem, not modeling itself for the functionality of producing water out of thin air. That is not what we need. What we're in desperate need of is the cascading of nutrition, to use what you have, to generate value, and to always do more than you ever thought possible, because together we're on this path, this non-stop path of evolution and symbiosis. And those dialogues over 6 months' time with Fritjof and with Arnenes, they created a new platform that came from Japan. Japan had gotten the mandate to organize COP3, the Kyoto Protocol, in 1997. So in 1994, the United Nations University rector invited me to create and develop this think tank that would imagine what are the business models of the future if we are having the Kyoto Protocol approved. It was an incredible chance, because why would I consider the failed guru and the failed economists who got people on the path of palm oil around the world, how would he direct the think tank? And when I asked the Japanese government, the Ministry of Education and the United Nations University why, they said, well, Professor Gunter Pauli, it's very simple. If we would have advertised for this position amongst the academia, we would have had thousands of candidates. But if we would have advertised for this position and would have requested an entrepreneur with experience and failure in business to do it, we would have no candidate. You're the only one. And so I ended up in an ivory tower, 3 years in an ivory tower, where the scientists would bombard me with a lot of science that I had no clue what it was all about. But fortunately, I was sitting in this ivory tower at the United Nations University, and they took the patience to explain and to teach. I have learned in 3 years more of science than any PhD and postdoc can ever get under his belt or her belt. It was an amazing learning experience, and the scientific committee that included members of the Royal Academy of Sciences, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, Lawrence Livermore, Oak Ridge National Laboratories, Fraunhofer Institute, they all were around, and it gave me the immersion in science that I needed. Not because then I became a scientist. I don't have the habit, nor the culture, nor the mentality of a scientist. I'm way too undisciplined for that. But it gave me a clarity on the complexity, but also on the urgency to do things. So when in the Kyoto Protocol negotiations, it already became clear in '96 that none of my proposals of zero emissions would be tolerated or accepted. The only support I had was from Japan, because Japanese management knows what is zero defects, total quality management. They know what it is, zero accidents. And so they understood my language when I talked about zero emissions. It doesn't mean you have no emissions. It means that you know what to do with your emissions, so we can go beyond that great failure of humanity, that we are the only species living on Earth that is capable of producing something no one desires. So in 1996, I realized that my 2.5 years of think tank and work and thought developments was going to be totally useless for the Kyoto Protocol. And maybe the Kyoto Protocol and the COP forgot everything that I ever done, but I learned. And there were some incredible people at United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, Anders Wijkman, who was also a member of the Royal Academy of Sciences of Sweden, who came to me and said, you need to stop talking, you got to put it in practice. And from there on, I created this structure called the ZERI network, the Zero Emissions Research and Initiatives. People sometimes call it the Zero Emissions Research Institute. No. I'm not an institute. We are initiatives. We're a network of people who are committed. And amazingly, when I declared that this is what I wanted to do, The scientists came to support in even greater numbers than we ever had them when we were paying them. Now they were volunteers, and there were thousands of them who joined, guiding in the action. And then a second group of people emerged that are the doers. So I realized that I had a think tank and a do tank. And the think tank and the do tank doesn't talk to each other, but that was not necessary. I just made certain that both would be able to deploy the best of their abilities to transform society for the common good. So we created this set of initiatives, and from there on it's been a roller coaster. Since 1996, non-stop, project after project, we focused on implementation, obsessed with implementation. Of course, in the same time, my children kept on growing and I kept on being so busy. So I felt that I was missing something. And that missing was really spending time with children. And since I was so far away from my own children, I basically mentally adopted the children of the world. And I decided that if we're going to make a difference in '97, I decided that I would have to translate every single insight in science, every single new learning from nature, and every innovative project implemented has to be translated into a fable. We started writing the first fables in the early 90s, but by 1997 I had 36 fables ready. And there came Curitiba, Brazil. A big shift in my life has been Curitiba, Brazil. I was in Curitiba in 1976 when Jaime Lerner, then the architect mayor, was just elected and was going to transform the city. And in 1977, my friend Flavio Schiavon, with whom I had lived together in the United States, said, you know, hey, this city is going to change the world on how we design cities. And I was there when they started to design it. The city of Curitiba in the year 2000 decided that they wanted to adopt my education, my pedagogy, and make it available to 140,000 children and 6,000 teachers so they could be inspired by the positive news that I was bringing, by the science, by the emotions, and by the arts that were, of course, always embedded in anything that we're doing. Spending time in Brazil in the year 2000 and learning about pedagogy, I came to the incredible discovery of Paulo Freire. You know, how is it possible that Paulo Freire succeeds in teaching people to read and write in 2 weeks? I mean, I needed 9 months. And at the same time, I had this scientist, George Chan, who taught me how the pigs go to the toilet in 3 days. And I needed, I think, probably 6 months before I was clean. So I was face to face with these down-to-earth scientists who had the most practical solutions. And then I came to Hong Kong, and I was at the Chinese University and met with Professor Chang Shu-ting. And he said, you know, the biggest opportunity in the world is people drinking coffee, and the waste of the coffee is great for mushroom farming. And of course, before anyone could stop their sentence, I was putting up the pig farms in Fiji, and I was organizing the mushroom farming in Colombia. And of course, I was focusing on getting things done. And getting things done after doing it for months and years in a row gives you an air of arrogance, an air of self-confidence that is bothersome, that's going too far. Because I think that nothing could stop now. I really felt that, you know, with the science that's available, the emotion, the culture, the commitment to the common good, it allows us to do things that everyone thought was impossible, and yet it was my new reality. I realized I started to live in a new world, in a new economy, and my wife Katerina called it the blue economy. It's that opportunity to thrive. I had to reflect back and wonder, why is it possible? And it's not possible because I'm so good. It's not possible because I'm smart, or we have money, or we have anything. It was possible because I realized that over the years I had recognized the undercurrents in society, the flows of energy that were already there. And I came to this liberating insight that I was surfing the energies that are in society. You know, a surfer doesn't make the waves. If I would try to make the waves and lobby and force and push and check, I would be dead of a heart attack by now. But fortunately, somehow I had the gift to find the energies, the undercurrents, the waves that were there, and I learned how to surf life. And once you have surfed, other people think that they can surf as well. And of course it requires a little bit of technique here and there, but the combination of having the science, the practice, the teaching, the learning, and having the philosophy around it from the probably some of the brightest people that ever mankind will have known, it gave me the chance to stand on the shoulder of about 100 people that gave me that vision into the future. And that blue economy vision I thought was going to be the conclusion. And now 9 years later I know it was just the beginning. And that is why I learned from my educational programs that everything is just the beginning. Because in 2004 came another surprise, is that the Chinese wanted to publish my Fables. It took a couple of years before all the right arrangements were made, but by 2009 the first series of Fables were published in China. And we did the tests, and the Academy approved, and the party, and the Chinese Society for the Promotion of Science and Technology was in favor, and some business people thought it was a good idea. And as a result, I find myself in China with hundreds of my books published, and the demand to have a total of 365 by 2022. And that's when I realized that I was creating legacy. Because projects, promoting, pushing, writing is one thing. But being able to create a platform of inspiration for children throughout China and the rest of the world is a gift, is a privilege, is an honor. And so I have this urge at this moment to create this legacy of the 365 fables, which will bring together more than 10,000 subjects of science. And as I have had the privilege of being exposed to all the science, and all the scientists explained it to me, in every book I honor the scientist who inspired me with that fable, who gave me that insight. And of course I honor as well the sentient being from nature that of course has been associated with it, being it you know, a small algae or being it a big elephant. It doesn't make any difference. The shiitake mushroom can inspire me as much as a spirulina. And I think what we are in need of is to navigate again this vast set of knowledge, not because we can regurgitate and we can learn it by heart, but we have the opportunity to see that we are basically just beginning in discovering what life is all about on this earth. And that brings me to a life philosophy of the legacy, but a life philosophy, a legacy that goes beyond the legacy. It's a story of the masters and the grandmasters. You know, when you're a professor and you have the privilege to teach, of course you're hard on your students because you want them to be the best and you want them to go beyond what I think is possible. But when you're a professor, sometimes you're so good you can become a master. You can become a master because your insights and your dialogues with your students transcend the subject that you have been working on. And if you're a good professor, you have good students, and if you have good students, they may also become professor and teach the master some more things that actually the professor and the master could never have imagined himself. Learning from the students, learning from my students is the most humbling, but also the most enriching thing in life. And what happened is that I realized that when there are people who turn grandmasters, is because as masters they learn from their students. And this is what is the philosophy of life. We all have to strive to become grandmasters because we teach what we know, we inspire what we have as vision. But then if you inspire well and teach well, then you will get back so much more. And others can come and stand on your shoulders. And this is really the phase in life where I'm now. I have to take the time to share, to inspire, and to secure that there are many more masters and grandmasters coming after, and secure that they can do much better than I've ever been able to imagine I could ever do.
Thank you. So you started when you were at the story when you were 16, but then what kind of a child were you like? Because you were elected as student leader, so you were very active in different ways. But then, how was your formative years when you were a child, a teenager? Could you tell us some stories about that?
Sure. You know, I was the youngest, and as the youngest, you're a spoiled brat. Mom always spoils the last one that came out of her belly. I mean, that's just the privilege you have as being the youngest. The oldest one has to work hard and the youngest has a bit easier. But I was a strange one because my mom caught me at the age of 6 reading an encyclopedia. I don't think I could even read it. I was just looking at the picture in the encyclopedia and I thought page after page that I wanted to learn more. And when I was 8 years old, I told my mom that I had decided I was going to leave for America when I was 18. And from now on, she wouldn't give me any more gifts for Christmas, New Year, or birthdays. She would save money for me so that when I'm 18, I could go to America. My mom approved it. And at the age of 8, I started saving. And at the age of 18, I left for America. And that was perhaps one of the most formative things that happened in my early years in life, is this determination that was very clear, but that unconditional belief of mom that of course you will do that and of course we will do that. If that's what you want, let's do it. My necessity to work while studying, to take care of the family, was also a gift. But I had the most incredible professions. I mean, I did the strangest jobs. Actually, my best money-making activity was as disc jockey. I was a disc jockey in nightclubs. I was making even more money, I think, than my dad at the time was making. And I was just playing music. But I also realized after a few years that playing music is not what takes you through the rest of your life. I was not going to be a DJ for the rest of my life, but playing music has made actually something very unique because it gives me a sense for the rhythm that is in society. But one trip was very special. When I was 6 years old, my mom and dad took me to Austria. And we went to Austria and we visited Salzburg. And in the city of Salzburg, we went, of course, to the birthplace of Mozart. And there I'm looking as this 6-year-old prodigy that was composing music and playing in front of the Empress of Austria. And Mozart was born in 1756. And I was born in 1956, 200 years later. And then I realized at the age of 6, Mozart had actually traveled already to Antwerp, my hometown. And I was 6, and I traveled to his hometown. I had never heard of reincarnation, but it was very clear that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and me, we were connected. I had no idea how we were connected and what the connection was all about, but it was there. And I don't know how. But that was something that made me very determined. If Mozart was able to compose 628 pieces of music in a 30-year career, why can't I write 365 fables and 25 books in a 50-year career? And so this clarity by projection over time was something I got when I was 6 years old. And what a privilege to do it. So in 1991, when it was the International Mozart Year, I brought Mozart back to Belgium. I brought him to the 7 cities that he had visited, and I published a comic strip with the travels of Mozart through Belgium. And that comic strip sold nearly 1 million copies in Belgium. And then we realized that the first sonata Mozart had composed, he had composed in Brussels. And no one in Belgium knew about it, so I did the edition of the Brussels Sonata on a CD in Belgium, in the place where Mozart had played hundreds of years before. And that is the kind of connectivity sometimes that I feel that I've been enriched with. It is something that transcends my life, it's something that transcends my time, but it clearly means that in the cosmos we're connected. And if you're ready to receive the connection, then you can enjoy it.
Last question is, some people compare you to Che Guevara, and what do you say to that?
Well, you know, I have been compared by the Huffington Post and the Tasmanian Times and Le Point in France. I've been compared to Steve Jobs and be the Steve Jobs of sustainability. But I always caution people, because the Huffington Post claimed that Donald Trump had a 2% chance of getting elected the day of the elections. So Huffington Post has it wrong quite often. Che Guevara, well, you know, maybe I should shave off my beard, but it is very clear that I'm not Che Guevara and I'm not at all Steve Jobs. But what people are looking for are rebels. We need more rebels. And we don't need rebels who copy other rebels. We need rebels who are genuinely rebels at their own time, in their own way, with their own actions and their own dreams to come true.